everybody. My name is Celeste. I'm going to be presenting on dVEM, what was previously called dVEM. dVEM being short for Digital Icon Emotion Measure. And this is a call to action specifically to have validated and reliable measures in digital healthcare. And I'll go over what that means. So because this is a 9-minute presentation, it's pretty much a snapshot, and we structured it in a series of questions. So why should anyone listen to us at the FavTech Lab? So this is pretty much who we are. Why does anyone need to make apps for healthcare? So what apps really do in healthcare spaces, whether they're useful and how we can define whether they're useful, and then how dVEM can kind of help with that definition of whether an app is useful or not. So we're not going to tell you to trust us just because. These are our credentials. So everyone out of Rochester Institute of Technology, everyone out of our RIT team is a scientist practitioner. And what that means is that they split their time between research. Our research is specifically clinical trials on personalized healthcare technology, so eHealth treatments for aggression and substance use and within homeless populations. And at the same time, we also split our time with clinical practice, which means that everyone on our team sees patients. And as far as my credentials, like I said, this is a 9-minute presentation, so it's quite short. But I am a postdoctoral clinical psychologist at RIT. This is my email if you want to ask any more questions, or we can go over any of this in more detail. And this is my Twitter too, if you want to contact me that way. So you can see me now. I'm in the corner of the screen. We're now on our next question, right? So does anyone need to make an app for healthcare, right? What's the point? And so we can answer this question using the scientific method. I'm going to give you a second to just look this over, right? These are the different steps in the scientific method. And so what you do is you start with an observation, right? So let's say that you notice that people are having panic attacks in healthcare situations, right? So they're having panic attacks specifically in hospital waiting rooms. So you find out, right? You do research and you find out that people are, they are going to therapy, but they can't use their skills. Something is getting in the way of using skills in hospital settings. And so you come up with a hypothesis that people can use an app to remind them of their skills or practice their skills while they're in the waiting room. So your hypothesis is that if they're in the waiting room and they're having a panic attack, then the app will be a way to rehearse and remind them, right? And so that means that you can also quantify that, right? If they have the app, then their panic attacks will decrease, right? App equals less panic. And then you go to a place where you test it, right? So you have the app, you test their level of panic, and then you have a no app condition, and how many people have panic then, right? And then you use that data to check whether the hypothesis was correct or not, right? Did their panics decrease? Did it not? And then if it didn't decrease, what got in the way? Were there aspects of the app design that maybe weren't helpful? So to think about that in a different way, you have a pre-treatment condition, right? You have the number of panic attacks that people are having, and then you can also test them in the moment. How distressed are they when they're in a hospital setting? You give them your app, and then after treatment, you find out that they're having less panic attacks, and they're also saying that they're less distressed. So that's if you're using the scientific method, if you're using the experimental method. But what happens if you're not using it, right? If you're just kind of making an app because you maybe did the literature review or you maybe observed something, so you know that people are having panic attacks and maybe they don't have the skills. You give them your app and then you tell people, yeah, you should use my app. And they say, does it change anything? And you say, hey, just trust me. I'm sure it works. I paid someone good money to make it. So dVEM is a way to quantify whether apps are changing anything. So it specifically speaks to that fear aspect that I was talking about before. Fear, happiness, anger. It's an emotion state and intensity before and after exposure to any game or app for change. We made it completely visual, completely nonverbal, and we designed every icon and instruction so that it was able to generalize across languages, cultures, and age groups. A lot of research went into it, and I'm very excited to talk about it in a lot of depth. So again, please email me or tweet at me, and I will tell you all about all the science we did. But as far as looking at it in the terms that we were just defining, a patient might select that they're a 10 out of 10 in fear, right? So what was written before, you give them your app, and then you find out that they are a 2 out of 10 in fear. So maybe the app doesn't get rid of their fear of hospital settings in general. You can't erase someone's emotional response, but it does decrease the intensity. So someone asks you, how does my app work? And instead of saying, trust me, you say, it changed their fear. They were a 10, and on average, they're a 2 afterwards. So my picture's gone because there's quite a lot of information on this slide. Again, this is something I'm very passionate about, so please email me or tweet me about this. But a good scientific app is both valid and reliable. So the things on this slide speak to the validity indexes that we built into dVEM. So dVEM, so there's construct validity, which is whether something represents what it's supposed to represent. And so all the faces in dVEM, and you can see down here, this is the face for happiness. They're made off of specific stimulus images that break happiness down into different sections of the face. And then they change in intensity levels based on this kind of scientific foundation. If you want to look that up, it's based on Ekman's research. And then this is a lot of information here. This is the literature we did on the universality of the colors that were used. This is on the universality of the non-emotion icons. These are studies on legal language and what tends to be interpreted in different ways. And then these are on aphasic studies. So aphasia is when a person loses, well, one type of aphasia is when people lose the ability to speak. They can still think verbally, but they can't speak. And so often they use icons to communicate. And so these are all the different bodies of literature that we pulled from to make sure that our scale had construct validity. So another metric of whether an app is evidence-based or valid is how reliable it is. So you might have a good literature base, but how reliably and how stably are the emotions tagged to what they're supposed to be across people and settings. And so we have a few different ways we're testing that. One is that we're asking people to rate the icons, right? So when people look at these things, do they rate them as what they're supposed to be? Another experimental study that we're doing is how quickly people sort the emotions into different categories. So this is very reaction time based. And then another one that we're doing is when people mimic the facial expressions, how accurate are they to the emotion that they're supposed to be, these icons are supposed to be emulating. All right, I'm back in the corner of the screen. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening. I know I've said this a few times, but I'm very passionate about rigor and having evidence base behind what's being said. As I said before, otherwise you are just asking people to trust you and you're not really sure if the app that you made is changing anything. So other than whether someone has used the app or not, right? And so if you want to see a demo, this app it's done. We're collecting data on it. If you want to use it for the apps that you're designing, it could be integrated into any other measure, any other platform. Please reach out to us. My email's in the bottom. And if you just would like to look at any of the research behind it, reach out to us as well. Thank you, and have a great Games for Change.